Um, just first of all, can you tell us why Dominic Cummings has decided to leave government?
As he wrote right at the beginning of the year in his own words, he planned to make himself largely redundant this year, with the big thing that he'd worked on, of course, which was Brexit, coming to an end in the end of the transition period, which is 31st of December. And of course, the other big thing has been helping to ensure we have a rollout of mass testing and can defeat this virus. And both these things are on the near-term horizon now.
Will you miss him?
Well, he's been in any government, you require people who are going to shake things up and come along with ideas. And he's actually been that person. So I have to tell you, I've enjoyed working with him. We haven't always agreed over everything. That's absolutely right. That's how it should be. And you need people in government who do that. So yeah, he'll be missed. But then again, we're moving into a different phase. Brexit will be, we've already left Europe, but the transition period will be over, and things move on, and advisors do come and go.
Many people have been baffled as to why Boris Johnson's held on to him as long as he has. Of course, he undermined public adherence to the lockdown. He's at odds with the civil service. He's at odds with a great deal of your parliamentary peers. Is it simply that Boris Johnson is afraid to do the job without him?
No, I don't think, advisors advise and the Prime Minister decides. And the Prime Minister will take advice from a very wide range of voices. In fact, that's one of the things about Boris Johnson, is that he is his own man with these things. He'll listen to people and then he'll come to his own conclusion. I've seen that many, many times. So he doesn't necessarily side with one person or the other. But it's great to have a sort of wide range of voices available and actually challenge things which sometimes rather lazily, as can happen in any walk of life, but happens in government, can become untested, unchallenged ideas. And of course, with Dominic Cummings, that was never the case. He'd always ask the question, why? And it's good to have somebody in government asking that question. But as I say, I know that this is convulsing Westminster and fascinating to some of the media. I suspect out in the real world, where this last week we've been getting that mass testing program going in Liverpool, which is really fantastic.
Well, hang on. I mean, we can talk about that in a moment.
Rolled out further.
But I know you're keen to shrug this off as tittle-tattle, but people at home...
Let me just, if you don't mind, finish that point, because I think it's really, really important to say that actually the big decisions that this government's been making on things like mass testing, we've had the good news about vaccines, we've got things like what will happen with students at Christmas, are probably all vastly more of interest and importance to your viewers this morning than who is coming or who is going at some point in Downing Street.
Well, I mean, they're linked, aren't they? I mean, a lot of people are saying that the chaos behind the door of number 10 is inextricably linked to the chaos that we're seeing in terms of U-turns, lurching from crisis to crisis. So Dominic Cummings himself, of course, was behind the testing moonshot idea. What's going to happen to that now?
Well, as I was just saying, the testing moonshot is happening through mass testing in Liverpool. There's only one other place in the world where this type of mass testing with lateral flow testing involved, which is results which take place very, very quickly within an hour or two, where it's happening on this scale and it's becoming bigger and bigger. If you look at what's happened with the testing program, we're testing more per head of population than any other country, certainly in Europe. And that's happened because those big ideas about doing things differently have been there. So these are real world things which will actually impact on people's lives. And that's why I think it's really important that we do stay focused on the very big issues facing us. And we're facing, a global pandemic which needs to be defeated. And those are the big issues, not, I'm afraid to say, not who happens to be in and who happens to be out of Downing Street. Advisors come and go. But it's ministers who make these decisions, and the Prime Minister ultimately will decide on all of these things.
Well, these were absolutely key allies, though, weren't they, Lee Kane and Dominic Cummings, of the Prime Minister, his vote leave boy band, if you will. And the question, I suppose, will be is what direction now will the country be going on? Will we see more of Carrie Simon's hand in big decision-making?
Well, I've never bought this at all. This government's made up of people who voted to leave and people who didn't, like me, but were all committed to the simple realisation of making sure that the UK can be an independent coastal nation outside of the EU and delivering for people in this country and be able to make those decisions on our own. And let me just give you a simple example of where I think that's worked. We've seen this week this extraordinary breakthrough with the Pfizer vaccine. We hope to see others with things like the Oxford AstraZeneca one. I remember back in the early summer being told that because we hadn't signed up to the EU program to buy these vaccines, we'd somehow be left behind. Not at all. What's actually happened is we got to the front of the queue. We made purchases of a number of half a dozen different vaccines and made sure that we are able to be amongst the first to roll these out, whilst it turns out that the others are the people who didn't buy them. Now, that's a very practical example of how our mission to ensure that this country can be independent, make our own laws and look after ourselves is actually working in reality. And that wouldn't have happened without some of the advisors who you're talking
being manufactured in Belgium. How much certainty can you give our viewers that the operation to get that vaccine onto UK shores won't be thwarted by sort of Brexit chaos?
Well, I mean, in terms of the transition period, we've been doing an extraordinary amount of work to make sure that our borders can flow.
So is that a guarantee then?
Well, I was going to say that it's as undisrupted as is possible, and we need to see, because we don't have. We don't have. I was going to say we don't have the final a final deal with the EU, and so we don't know whether we'll be leaving on the so-called Australia or the Canadian style departure. But either way, what I can tell you, because I've been down, I've looked at the facilities at places like Sevington in Kent, where there's a massive facility being created there to ensure that lorries can come and go and paperwork and everything can be checked properly, that we will be prepared for whatever comes. And this country will make sure we get through that. And yes, in answer to your question on vaccines specifically, I have absolutely no concern whatsoever that the vaccines that we've purchased, in this case, I'm having the foresight to have purchased the Pfizer vaccine. But as I say, also quite a number of other vaccines. We've got over 300 million different vaccines in the offing that will make sure that we have those for this country. And those are the big issues that we've been focused on. And I know that all you want to talk about this morning is who's in and who's out of Downing Street. These are not people who are elected. These are not people who are running the country. But they are providing advice. But in the end, ministers and the prime ministers decide, and nothing will change whenever, whomever comes and goes.
Gosh, we need that vaccine though, don't we? We've had 50,000 deaths this week, quite a grim milestone. Yesterday, we saw that huge spike in cases. And of course, we've seen the deaths in the 500s this week. How worried are you about the situation?
Yeah, no, we certainly need that vaccine. I really think that I hope we're going to be in a position here to sort of hit this virus with a double whammy. On the one side, you've got that vaccine, which looks very positive. And the most positive thing about that vaccine is if that one works, then likely others will as well, including, for example, the Oxford AstraZeneca one. But the other side of the double whammy is the mass testing program, which gives us a glimmer of how things could work, which is people being able to get a test on a perhaps by daily basis to make sure that they're in the clear, not with coronavirus, and then go about more of our normal life. Now, we've seen the rollout in Liverpool, which is very ambitious, as you said, one of those moonshots, teaching us a lot, showing us a lot, and we're now preparing to send out hundreds of thousands more to many, many locations around the country. Dozens of public health officers have asked to be part of this growing trial. And that's the other side of it. So between mass testing and the prospect of the virus, I think it's time to hit the coronavirus very hard from both sides.
There's some evidence, isn't there, that huge jump in infections yesterday is linked to the delay between the announcement of lockdown and its imposition a few days later. And that, of course, was prompted by a leak that came out from Downing Street. Another example of why what goes on in Downing Street is incredibly important. We're seeing what, compared to the day before, an extra almost 11,000 cases yesterday.
Well, it's quite hard to know precisely when those cases were picked up, but I mean, it is the case, I think, that the more we adhere to these restrictions, and remember, we came in from the tier restrictions to this full lockdown, and the more we adhere to it, and it's why it's so important, the better our chances, because, you know, as sure as night follows day, People mixing will create the infections, which creates the hospital cases, and very, very sadly and tragically, and our thoughts are with everybody who has been affected by coronavirus. But these deaths are heartbreaking, of course, and that is why we ask people to follow the very strict guidance, and whether that is the current
Are people
situation or
following
when
it,
we
do you
go
think,
back
this
in
time?
years. Sorry.
Are people following it this time?
Yes, I hope so. I mean, generally speaking, I think people respond when
The
the
roads
rules
seem
are
very
clear,
busy,
and of
though, don't
course,
they?
I was going to say that when you have a lockdown, it's much simpler to understand, because everyone knows you can't leave your house unless it's for work or education, or for one of very minimal number of reasons. That's much more straightforward than rules of six, and then various different iterations of that. So that is more straightforward. I think people want to do the right thing. I think, though, we are all fed up with it. We're all, sick to the teeth of having this virus around. It is important that with these great developments of that mass testing program, which has been pioneered in this country and is delivering already over 500,000 tests a day, something people said that they didn't think could happen by the end of October, did. And then further to that, the mass testing Liverpool style program, and then the vaccine coming along. I think it's sort of, it gives people hope they can see light over the horizon, but we need to curb our enthusiasm to an extent, because we also need to make sure that in the meantime, we follow these rules and make sure that we're not mixing, and make sure we therefore get on top of the virus, not spreading day to day, whilst we're waiting for these things to come over the horizon.
Okay, just a final question, because we're almost out of time, on quarantining. Is there a chance it could be reduced down from 14 days to perhaps just a week?
Well, we've said we want to use technology to improve things. So we want to ensure that quarantining or self-isolation, in both cases, when you're asked to self-isolate by NHS Test and Trace, or indeed with international travel, my area, that's reduced. And so we have said we're actively working on that, and I'll be saying more about the international side of that very soon.